The yellow school bus rumbled through the tree-lined streets of Millfield Heights, its familiar diesel engine creating a steady rhythm that had become second nature to Frank Morrison. At 64, the former auto mechanic had discovered an unexpected calling in his retirement years, shepherding children safely to and from Millfield Middle School. After 4 decades under car hoods, the structured routine of bus routes provided both purpose and fulfillment. Golden afternoon light streamed through the windows as Frank glanced at his dashboard clock, 3:40 p.m., perfectly on schedule. Behind him, the usual symphony of teenage chatter filled the air, discussions about weekend plans, complaints about homework, and the endless drama of adolescent social hierarchies. Yet something nagged at Frank's attention as he adjusted his rearview mirror. 3 rows back, a girl sat in solitary silence, her auburn hair creating a curtain that partially concealed her face. Her posture spoke of withdrawal, shoulders curved inward as if protecting herself from the world. Frank had noticed her subtle but consistent pattern over the past several days, quiet tears that she thought no one could see. Consulting his student roster, Frank confirmed what he already knew: Emma Calloway, grade 8A, enrolled just 2 weeks prior. During her first week, Frank had attributed her reserved nature to typical new student anxiety. Most kids needed time to find their footing in unfamiliar territory. But this second week had revealed something more troubling, and today seemed particularly difficult for her. Elm Street stop coming up, Frank announced as he eased the bus toward the curb. 3 students gathered their belongings, offering polite thanks as they disembarked. Frank watched them disappear into their respective homes before continuing down his route. With each successive stop, the bus population dwindled, and Emma's distress became increasingly apparent. Only 4 students remained now, and Emma's stop marked the final destination on Frank's route. As they navigated a sharp turn, Frank observed something unusual through his mirror. Emma suddenly hunched forward, her hand disappearing beneath her seat near the floor vents. The sound of metal against metal echoed through the now quiet bus. "Everything okay back there?" Frank called out, genuine concern coloring his voice. Emma's head snapped up, startled eyes meeting his in the mirror. "Yes, sorry," she stammered, her voice barely audible. "I just dropped something." Frank nodded but felt an uncomfortable knot forming in his stomach. Yesterday, he'd attempted conversation with Emma, asking about her classes, how she was adjusting, but received only monosyllabic responses before she retreated back into silence. The bus pulled up to Emma's home, a modest ranch-style house with peeling white paint on Oakwood Lane. Frank made a decision he'd been contemplating all week. He couldn't continue ignoring what he was witnessing. "Last stop," he announced, engaging the door mechanism. Emma rose slowly, gathering her navy blue backpack with movements that seemed to require tremendous effort. As she passed his seat, Frank noticed the telltale signs, reddened eyes and dark shadows beneath them that spoke of sleepless nights. "Have a nice evening, Emma," he offered with genuine warmth. She managed a barely perceptible nod before stepping off the bus. To her obvious surprise, Frank followed, stepping down onto the sidewalk. "Why are you getting off the bus?" Emma asked, alarm creeping into her voice. Frank raised his hands in a calming gesture. "I've noticed you've been upset during our rides," he said gently. "It's been happening for several days now. I wanted to speak with your parents to make sure everything's all right." Fear flickered across Emma's features before she attempted to mask it. "That's not necessary," she protested, her voice rising slightly. "It's nothing serious. School's just been challenging, and I miss my friends from my old school." Frank studied her expression, his decades of life experience telling him there was more beneath the surface. Before he could respond, the front door of the house swung open abruptly. A man emerged onto the porch, his face unreadable. "Emma," he called sharply. "Come inside." Emma shot Frank a look that seemed almost desperate before hurrying toward the house. The man's attention turned to Frank with an unwelcoming stare. "Is there some kind of problem?" he asked, his tone neutral but somehow hostile. Frank approached cautiously, stopping at a respectful distance from the porch. "No problem, sir," he replied. "I'm Frank Morrison, Emma's bus driver. I wanted to check in because I've noticed she seems distressed during the ride home. I'm Mark Stevens, Emma's stepfather, the man replied. Her mother is out right now. Frank nodded. I just wanted to let you know that Emma's been crying on the bus. I was concerned that something might be bothering her. Mark's expression softened marginally, though his eyes remained cold. Her great-aunt passed away recently, he explained matter-of-factly. It's been difficult for everyone, but Emma took it especially hard. They had a special bond. She'll work through it eventually. I'm very sorry for your loss, Frank said, feeling a slight easing of his concern now that there was an explanation. Please accept my condolences. I didn't mean to intrude. Thanks, Mark said curtly, already turning away. Have a good day. The door closed with finality before Frank could finish his farewell. Walking back to his bus, Frank couldn't shake a lingering sense of unease. While the stepfather's explanation was reasonable, something about his demeanor felt wrong. There had been no trace of grief when he mentioned the death, and he'd seemed eager to end the conversation. His dismissal of Emma's emotional state as something she'd work through eventually struck Frank as particularly callous. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, Frank muttered as he climbed back into the driver's seat. The guy could just be dealing with his own grief or be naturally reserved. Still, as he started the engine and pulled away from the curb, the image of Emma's pleading expression haunted him. Frank drove back to the bus depot, his mind still occupied with thoughts of Emma. The late afternoon sun cast elongated shadows across the suburban landscape as he pulled into his designated parking space. His end-of-day routine was methodical, walking the length of the bus, checking each seat for forgotten items, collecting the usual debris that accumulated during the school day. Working his way from the back toward the front, Frank gathered the typical assortment of abandoned belongings, crumpled assignments, empty snack wrappers, and half-finished water bottles. When he reached the front section where Emma typically sat, he paused. This was the area where he'd heard that metallic sound, where she'd claimed to have dropped something. Frank crouched down, his knees protesting with familiar aches. The floor around the seat appeared clean, no tissues or obvious debris. His attention focused on the heating vent installed in the floor. It appeared secure, but closer examination revealed a small gap between the vent cover and the seat base. What do we have here? He murmured, working his fingers into the narrow opening. His fingertips encountered something smooth and unfamiliar. With some maneuvering, Frank managed to extract a small plastic package. When he brought it into the light, his breath caught. It was a blister pack of pink tablets, partially depleted. Frank examined it more closely, reading the brand name and dosage information printed on the backing. His heart sank as he pulled out his phone and searched for the medication online. The results confirmed his worst fears. These were oral contraceptives, birth control pills. Frank sank heavily into the driver's seat, staring at the package in disbelief. A 14-year-old girl was hiding contraceptive pills on his school bus. Combined with her crying and withdrawn behavior, the implications were deeply troubling. With slightly trembling hands, Frank photographed the pills from multiple angles, carefully documenting his discovery. He then tucked the package into his jacket pocket, feeling the weight of responsibility settle heavily on his shoulders. Frank located Principal Williams' contact information and sent the photos along with a brief message. Found these concealed under a seat on my bus today. They belong to a student. Please advise on how to proceed. After sending the message, he waited anxiously for a response. When none came immediately, he decided to call the principal directly. This is Principal Williams, came the crisp voice after 3 rings. Hello, sir. This is Frank Morrison, driver for Route 12. The principal's audible sigh carried clearly through the phone. Mr. Morrison, I'm currently in a budget meeting with the district office. Is this urgent? I haven't had time to check my messages. Frank hesitated, unsure how much detail to provide over the phone. I found something concerning on the bus that belongs to one of your students. I believe you should review it as soon as possible. I'll examine whatever you sent after my meeting concludes, Principal Williams responded, his tone indicating the conversation was over. I prefer not to be interrupted unless there's a genuine emergency. The line went dead, leaving Frank staring at his phone in frustration. He had expected more urgency from the principal, especially given the nature of his discovery. I suppose I'll have to handle this myself for now, Frank said aloud, gathering his belongings and heading for the exit. After returning his bus keys and clocking out, Frank made his way to the parking lot where his aging Honda Civic waited. The car had seen better days, the silver paint was fading and there was a persistent knock in the engine, but it had served him faithfully for nearly 2 decades. As he drove home, Frank's route naturally took him past Emma's neighborhood. Part of him felt compelled to stop at her house again, to show Mark Stevens what he'd discovered and ensure Emma's safety. But the memory of the stepfather's dismissive attitude gave him pause. He might not even be aware of what's happening, Frank reasoned aloud. The girl could be hiding this from everyone. He drove past the turn to Oakwood Lane, then found himself slowing the car as his conscience wrestled with indecision. After a moment's hesitation, he made a U-turn and headed back toward Emma's house. Parking in front of the modest ranch home, Frank took a steadying breath. He wasn't looking forward to another interaction with Mark Stevens, but his concern for Emma outweighed his discomfort. He approached the door and knocked firmly. No response came. He waited a reasonable interval before knocking again, this time more loudly. Still nothing. Frank peered through the front window, but the house appeared dark and empty. No signs of movement or occupancy were visible. It seemed no one was home, despite it being less than an hour since he dropped Emma off. Returning to his car, Frank consulted the emergency contact list he maintained for all students on his route. He found Emma's information and dialed the number listed under Mark Stevens' name. After several rings, the call went to voicemail. Odd, Frank muttered, hanging up without leaving a message. Where could they have gone so quickly? With a frustrated sigh, he started his car and began the drive home. He had done what he could for the moment. Perhaps Principal Williams would return his call soon, or he could try reaching the family again later. Frank had traveled only a few blocks when he spotted a familiar figure emerging from the CVS pharmacy on Cedar Avenue. It was Emma, walking alone and looking visibly ill. She had one arm wrapped around her midsection as if in pain. Without hesitation, Frank pulled over and got out of his car. Emma, he called softly, not wanting to startle her. The girl looked up, surprise and exhaustion crossing her face when she recognized him. She stopped walking but maintained her distance. Are you feeling all right? Frank asked, noting her pale complexion. You look like you're in pain. I'm fine, she replied flatly, though her posture suggested otherwise. Frank glanced around the area. Where's your stepfather? Did he bring you here? That's none of your concern, Emma responded, her voice taking on a defensive edge. What do you want from me? Frank held up his hands in a non-threatening gesture. I'm just worried about you, that's all. I've been driving school buses for years, and I can tell when a student is struggling with something serious. Emma shifted uncomfortably, her grip on her stomach tightening. I told you I'm fine. Please leave me alone. Before Frank could respond, a middle-aged couple walking by slowed their pace, looking between him and Emma with obvious concern. Is everything all right here? The man asked, directing the question to Emma. The girl hesitated briefly, then said in a quiet voice, He's making me uncomfortable. The couple immediately positioned themselves between Frank and Emma, their posture protective. Sir, I think you should move along, the woman said firmly. Frank felt heat rise in his cheeks from embarrassment and frustration. I'm her school bus driver. I was just checking if she needed assistance. She's clearly indicated she doesn't want your help, the man replied. Please leave before we call the authorities. Recognizing that further explanation would only make the situation worse, Frank reluctantly returned to his car. As he drove away, he glanced in his rearview mirror and saw the couple had already continued on their way, leaving Emma alone once again. He slowed his car and watched as Emma suddenly doubled over near a trash receptacle, retching violently. Something is definitely wrong here, Frank muttered, his concern deepening. His first instinct was to contact the police, but what would he tell them? That a girl said he made her uncomfortable, that he found birth control pills and she was now vomiting. He had no concrete evidence of immediate danger, and involving law enforcement without first consulting the parents could create unnecessary complications. Frank decided to keep Emma in sight from a distance. He parked across the street, feeling uncomfortable about essentially surveilling a young girl, but convinced his intentions were protective. If he witnessed anything genuinely alarming, he would intervene immediately. From his vantage point, Frank watched as Emma composed herself and walked unsteadily toward a small convenience store at the end of the block. She disappeared inside, and Frank waited, occasionally checking his phone for any response from Principal Williams. After approximately 10 minutes, movement at the store entrance caught Frank's attention. Emma emerged, but she wasn't alone. Mark Stevens followed her out, pausing to lock the door behind him and flip the sign from open to closed. Frank realized that Mark must own or work at the convenience store, which explained his absence from home earlier. He observed as Mark handed Emma something to drink. From this distance, Frank couldn't determine if it was alcohol or something innocent like water or soda. Emma accepted it without enthusiasm, keeping her gaze fixed downward. Frank's finger hovered over his phone's emergency dial. Should he call the police? What if he was overreacting and there was a perfectly innocent explanation for everything he'd witnessed? But what if he wasn't, and Emma was in genuine danger? As he wrestled with indecision, Mark's car pulled away from the curb. Making a split-second decision, Frank started his engine. He would follow them discreetly to ensure Emma's safety while continuing to seek help from someone in authority. As Frank maintained a careful distance behind Mark's sedan, he scrolled through his contacts for other ways to help Emma. Principal Williams hadn't responded to his message, but perhaps there was someone else at the school he could reach. He found the number for Emma's homeroom teacher, Mrs. Patricia Santos, whom he'd met during the beginning of year staff orientation. He remembered her as a dedicated, compassionate educator. Putting the phone on speaker and placing it in his cup holder, Frank dialed as he drove. "Hello," came a pleasant female voice after the third ring. "Mrs. Santos, this is Frank Morrison, the driver for bus Route 12. "Yes, Mr. Morrison. Is everything all right?" Her voice carried a note of surprise at receiving a call from a bus driver. "I'm calling about one of your students, Emma Calloway," Frank explained, keeping his voice low despite the privacy of his car. "Have you noticed anything unusual about her behavior recently?" There was a pause before Mrs. Santos responded, her tone becoming more serious. "Actually, yes. She's extremely withdrawn, never interacts with her classmates, and she's been requesting frequent bathroom breaks during class." Frank nodded to himself, another piece of the puzzle falling into place. "Anything else?" "Today she seemed particularly unwell," Mrs. Santos continued. "I suggested she visit the nurse's office, but she went to the library instead and apparently fell asleep. The librarian found her there later." "Did you report this to Principal Williams?" Frank asked, carefully maintaining his distance from Mark's car as they merged onto the highway. "Yes, but he dismissed it as typical new student adjustment issues. Said he'd address it tomorrow after his district meetings." Mrs. Santos paused. "Why are you asking about this, Mr. Morrison? Has something happened on your bus?" Frank took a deep breath. "I found something under Emma's seat today." He briefly described discovering the contraceptive pills. "I'm sending you the photos now." He heard the soft notification sound of a received message, followed by silence as Mrs. Santos presumably examined the images. "These are birth control pills," she finally said, her voice hushed with concern. "Where exactly did you find them?" "Hidden under the seat where Emma always sits," Frank confirmed. "Based on what I've observed and what you've just told me, I'm extremely worried about her situation." "This is very serious," Mrs. Santos agreed. "The parents need to be notified immediately." "I've been trying to reach them," Frank explained, describing his earlier visit to their home and his current situation following Mark's car. "I'm considering contacting the police, but I'm not sure if that's appropriate yet." Please don't involve law enforcement just yet, Mrs. Santos urged. Principal Williams would be furious if we brought in outside authorities without his approval. We should attempt to handle this through proper school channels first. Let me see if I can locate the mother's contact information in our system. Frank noticed that Mark's car was now heading toward the outskirts of town, away from residential neighborhoods. They're driving toward the outskirts now, he reported. I'm going to continue following them to make sure Emma stays safe. Please be careful, Frank, Mrs. Santos cautioned. Keep me informed, and I'll try to reach the mother. After ending the call, Frank focused on maintaining a safe following distance as Mark's sedan continued down the highway. After approximately 30 minutes of driving, they turned off toward a state park, a large recreational area with hiking trails, picnic facilities, and a small lake. It was approaching 5 p.m., and while the park wasn't crowded, there were still several families enjoying the late afternoon. Mark parked near the main entrance, and Frank found a spot several rows away where he could observe without being conspicuous. He watched as Mark and Emma exited the car and walked toward the picnic area. Mark carried a small cooler while Emma trailed behind him, her body language suggesting reluctance. Frank waited until they were settled before cautiously leaving his vehicle and following on foot, maintaining his distance while keeping them in sight. A sense of foreboding settled in his stomach, but he hoped this was simply an innocent family outing. Yet Emma's miserable demeanor seemed inconsistent with a pleasant picnic. Frank made his way through the park, staying on the established paths and trying to appear like any other visitor enjoying the late afternoon sunshine. He kept Mark and Emma in his peripheral vision, not wanting to draw attention by staring directly at them. Mark had spread a blanket on the grass and was arranging items from his cooler. Frank observed as Mark opened a beer for himself and handed Emma what appeared to be a soft drink can. A wave of relief washed over Frank at the sight. At least Mark wasn't providing alcohol to a minor as he had feared. From his position on a nearby bench, Frank watched their interaction. What might have appeared to casual observers as a normal family picnic struck him as distinctly uncomfortable. Emma sat rigidly at the edge of the blanket, barely touching her drink. She kept her gaze fixed on the ground, responding to Mark's occasional comments with minimal acknowledgement. At one point, Mark reached over and placed his hands on Emma's shoulders in what appeared to be a playful massage. The girl immediately tensed and pushed his hands away with surprising force. Mark laughed it off, but Frank caught the brief flash of anger that crossed his expression. Perhaps I am overreacting, Frank murmured to himself, doubt beginning to creep in. Maybe Emma really is just grieving her great aunt's death, as Mark claimed. Perhaps the birth control pills are related to a relationship with a boy her own age, troubling for someone so young, but not necessarily sinister. Frank was beginning to consider leaving and allowing Principal Williams to handle the situation tomorrow when he noticed 3 men approaching Mark and Emma's picnic area. They appeared to be in their 30s or 40s, casually dressed, but with an intensity about them that immediately put Frank on high alert. Mark stood to greet them, embracing one and laughing as if they were old friends. After a brief conversation that Frank couldn't hear from his position, Mark gestured for Emma to stand. The 5 of them, Mark, Emma, and the 3 men, began walking away from the picnic area toward a plain concrete building that appeared to be a park maintenance facility. Frank's unease returned tenfold as he watched one of the men produce a key and unlock the door. There was no legitimate reason Frank could imagine for 4 adult men to take a teenage girl into a locked maintenance building in a secluded area of the park. With trembling hands, Frank pulled out his phone and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher answered promptly. I need to report a suspicious situation involving a minor, Frank said, keeping his voice low as he moved closer to the building. I'm at Riverside State Park near the maintenance facilities on the north side. A teenage girl has been taken into a locked building by 4 adult men. I believe she may be in immediate danger. Sir, are you certain the girl is in danger? Do you know her personally? Yes, I'm her school bus driver. I've been concerned about her behavior and discovered she's been hiding birth control pills on my bus. Now her stepfather has brought her to this isolated location to meet with these men. Frank's voice grew more urgent. Please send someone immediately. Something is very wrong here. We're dispatching officers to your location now, the dispatcher assured him. They should arrive in approximately 8 minutes. Can you safely remain on the line and keep the building in sight without approaching? Yes, I can do that, Frank confirmed, finding a position behind a cluster of trees where he could observe the building without being easily spotted. The dispatcher asked for descriptions of the individuals involved. Frank provided details about Mark, Emma, and the 3 men as best he could, including information about their clothing and the vehicles in the parking lot. As he spoke, he crept closer to the building, his concern for Emma overriding his normal caution. The structure had small, grimy windows set high in the walls. Frank approached one of them, wiping away dirt with his sleeve to peer inside. The interior was dimly lit, but he could make out the figures of the 4 men gathered around Emma. The girl was pressed against a wall, her face streaked with tears. "Do what you're told, Emma," Frank heard Mark say, his voice muffled but audible through the thin walls. "You know what happens if you don't cooperate." "Please don't make me," Emma pleaded, her voice breaking. "I can't do this anymore." "Your mother will despise you when she finds out you're pregnant," Mark hissed, his voice dropping lower. "When her new baby arrives, she'll forget you even exist." Frank's blood turned to ice at the words. He relayed what he was hearing to the 911 dispatcher, his voice tight with rage. "The officers are 2 minutes out," the dispatcher informed him. "Please do not attempt to intervene yourself." Frank was about to respond when he felt a tap on his shoulder. He spun around, nearly dropping his phone, to find 2 men in jogging attire standing behind him. "What are you doing looking in there, buddy?" one of them asked, his expression suspicious. Frank quickly explained the situation, keeping his voice low. "There's a girl in there who needs help. I've called the police, they're almost here." The 2 joggers exchanged glances, then looked through the window themselves. Their expressions hardened as they took in the scene inside. "We can't just stand out here," the taller one said, his jaw set with determination. "They could be hurting her right now." "The police said to wait," Frank began, but was interrupted by sudden silence from inside the building. The men had apparently heard something and gone quiet. Making a split-second decision, the joggers approached the door and pounded on it forcefully. "Hey! Open this door right now," one of them shouted. Complete silence fell, stretching for several tense seconds. Then, faintly, they heard Emma's voice cry out, "Help! Someone please help me!" As if summoned by her cry, police sirens wailed in the distance, rapidly growing louder. 2 patrol cars pulled into the park, emergency lights flashing, and 4 officers quickly approached the scene with weapons drawn. "Police! Everyone inside, come out with your hands visible," one officer commanded through the door. When no immediate response came, the officers exchanged quick signals before one returned to a patrol car and retrieved a battering ram. With practiced efficiency, they breached the door, wood splintering around the lock. "Hands up! On your knees now," the officers shouted as they entered the building. 3 of the men immediately complied, dropping to their knees with hands raised. But Mark remained standing near Emma, who was huddled on the floor. "Step away from the girl," an officer ordered, his weapon trained on Mark. Mark's face contorted with defiance. "This is all a misunderstanding," he insisted, not moving from his position over Emma. "Final warning," the officer said firmly. "Step away now or we will use force." With deliberate slowness, Mark reached for a bottle of liquor on a nearby shelf. "You don't understand," he began, his hand closing around the bottle's neck. "Drop it," several officers shouted in unison. "Drop it now or we will shoot." For a tense moment, it seemed Mark might try something desperate. Then, with a string of curses, he let the bottle fall back onto the shelf and raised his hands. "On your knees," the officer directed again. Finally, Mark complied, sinking to his knees. Officers moved in quickly to secure him with handcuffs. As they led the men out one by one, Mark's gaze locked on Frank standing outside. His face twisted with rage, and with a sudden burst of strength, he lunged toward Frank, nearly breaking free from the officer's grip. He shouted, attempting to charge at Frank before the officers restrained him fully. This is your fault. Frank stepped back, shock coursing through him at the man's violence. He watched as officers secured Mark in one of the patrol cars, the man still hurling obscenities through the window. Inside the building, Emma remained curled on the floor, her arms wrapped protectively around herself as a female officer gently approached her. Within 30 minutes of the arrests, the quiet park had transformed into a hub of official activity. Additional police cars had arrived along with an ambulance and a vehicle carrying a social worker. Yellow crime scene tape cordoned off the area around the maintenance building, and officers were taking statements from Frank and the two joggers who had helped intervene. The paramedics had guided Emma to the back of the ambulance where they were checking her vital signs and offering her a blanket despite the mild evening temperature. A female social worker sat beside her, speaking in gentle tones that Frank couldn't hear from where he stood. Frank watched as the two joggers finished giving their statements. They nodded respectfully to him as they departed, one offering an encouraging thumbs up. Frank felt profound gratitude for their intervention, strangers who had chosen to get involved when they could have simply continued their run. As police finished recording his statement, Frank saw Emma glance in his direction. Her eyes, still red from crying, held a new expression, tentative gratitude. She said something to the social worker, who nodded and gestured for Frank to approach. Frank walked over slowly, not wanting to overwhelm the girl after everything she had endured. "Thank you," Emma said quietly as he reached the ambulance, her voice hoarse from crying. Frank nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "I'm just glad you're safe now." He crouched down to be at her eye level, then carefully withdrew the pills he had found earlier from his jacket pocket. He showed them to Emma and the officials present. "Emma," he said gently, "I found these under your seat on the bus. I think you need to explain to these people about these pills, if you were taking them because of what your stepfather was doing to you." Emma's face crumpled at the sight of the pills, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. She looked between Frank, the social worker, and the female police officer who had joined them. "It's okay, Emma," the social worker assured her. "You're not in trouble. We just need to understand what's been happening so we can help you properly." Emma took a shuddering breath and began to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. "My mom divorced my real dad last year," she began. "He got in trouble with the law for embezzlement or something. Then Mom met Mark and she got pregnant really fast." Emma paused, pulling the blanket tighter around herself. "Mom's been away for 3 weeks now. She's staying at my grandmother's house because it's our family tradition. She wanted to give birth there and stay for a month with the baby afterward." The social worker took notes as Emma spoke, occasionally nodding encouragingly. "When did Mark start hurting you?" the police officer asked gently. Emma's gaze dropped to her hands. 6 weeks ago, she whispered. "He started coming into my room at night when I was asleep. I was terrified, but he told me if I told anyone, especially my mom, he would hurt us and the baby too." Her voice broke. "So I just stayed quiet and tried to be invisible." "And the pills?" Frank prompted softly, gesturing to the contraceptive package. "I started feeling sick in the mornings," Emma continued. "One of the girls at school noticed and told me I should get pregnancy prevention pills. I didn't really understand what they were, but she said they would help me not get pregnant, so I bought them with my babysitting money." The paramedic exchanged glances with the social worker, both looking concerned. "Emma," the paramedic said carefully, "if you were already feeling sick, like morning sickness, then birth control pills wouldn't help. They're designed to prevent pregnancy before it happens, not end one that's already begun." Emma looked up, confusion and fear in her eyes. "I didn't know that. I thought they would stop the sickness. Someone at school found them in my locker," she continued. "So I started hiding them under the seat on the bus where I always sit." The police officer placed a gentle hand on Emma's shoulder. "Emma, we're going to need to contact your mother, and we'll need to have a doctor examine you to determine if you're pregnant." "No, please," Emma begged, fresh panic in her voice. "I don't want this. I can't be pregnant. My mom will hate me." "Your mother won't hate you," the social worker assured her. None of this is your fault, Emma. Your stepfather is the one who did something terrible, not you. We do need to contact your mother, the officer said firmly but kindly. This isn't something we can keep from her. Emma's shoulders slumped in defeat as she nodded, tears streaming silently down her face. Frank watched the interaction with a heavy heart. He had seen troubled children before in his years as a bus driver, but nothing quite like this. He cleared his throat, drawing the attention of the officials. If it's all right, he said, I'd like to stay with Emma at the hospital. I don't want her to be alone while we wait for her mother. The social worker considered this for a moment, then nodded. That would be appropriate, Mr. Morrison. We'll need additional statement from you at the hospital as well. One of the police officers approached their group. Principal Williams has been contacted, he informed them. He says he'll meet us at the hospital. Frank nodded, remembering the message he had sent earlier that had gone unanswered. Her homeroom teacher, Mrs. Santos, is also aware of the situation. I contacted her earlier when I became concerned. We'll reach out to her as well, the officer confirmed. Now, let's get Emma to the hospital for proper medical care. The emergency room at Millfield General Hospital buzzed with its usual controlled chaos as Frank sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair, waiting for news. After their arrival, Emma had been taken for examination, leaving Frank to provide his statement to detectives in a small conference room down the hall. He checked his watch, nearly 3 hours had passed since they'd arrived at the hospital. The social worker, a compassionate woman named Ms. Rodriguez, occasionally updated him on the situation, but details were necessarily limited due to privacy concerns. As Frank sipped terrible coffee from the vending machine, Ms. Rodriguez approached him again. Mr. Morrison, she said, taking a seat beside him. Emma is asking for you. They've completed the initial examination, and she's been moved to a private room. Would you like to see her? Frank stood immediately. Yes, absolutely. Ms. Rodriguez led him through a maze of corridors to a small room where Emma sat on the edge of a hospital bed. She looked impossibly small in the oversized hospital gown, her eyes red-rimmed but dry for the moment. A female doctor was making notes on a tablet near the window. Frank? Emma said, a hint of relief in her voice. How are you doing, kiddo? He asked gently, taking a seat in the chair beside her bed. Before she could answer, the doctor spoke up. Mr. Morrison, I'm Dr. Park. I understand you're the one who initially recognized something was wrong. Frank nodded. I'm Emma's bus driver. I noticed her distress and then found those pills. Dr. Park's expression was grave. I've completed my examination of Emma, and I can confirm that she is indeed pregnant, approximately 6 weeks along. Frank closed his eyes briefly, the confirmation of his worst fears hitting him like a physical blow. When he opened them again, he saw tears silently streaming down Emma's face. A commotion in the hallway interrupted the moment. A woman's voice, high with panic, could be heard demanding information from hospital staff. Moments later, the door burst open and 2 women rushed in, one in her late 30s and another perhaps 20 years older. Emma, the younger woman cried, rushing.